Hi everyone, and welcome to Astrology Sphere. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different to my usual forecasts. I'm going to do something called a horary reading, and I'm going to do it using my geomancy cards because geomancy is it's part of the geomantic tradition actually to do horary style readings using the the astrological houses. And I suppose you're probably wondering why I'm suddenly departing from my usual type of forecast. Well, it's not actually a departure. If you've read my Astro Insights blog, which is linked on my website, but which you can go to directly at astroinsights.blog, you'll see that for many years I've blogged about current affairs, public figures, celebrities from a kind of astrological perspective. So I've always had an interest in current affairs, and of course I've got an interest in astrology, and astrology arose originally out of the need to provide advice to the king or whoever the leader was of a country. So astrology was actually originally developed for these types of predictions, and I find it's quite a pure type of astrology that mundane astrology and what they call interrogative style astrology. So I do like to do it from time to time, and the interesting thing about horary astrology is that it allows an element of chance to enter into readings, which I think is great when you're making predictions, particularly predictions in which you have no agency yourself, and therefore your kind of free will doesn't really have anything to do with the outcome of a situation. It's more to do with the free will and the interplay of various players, as well as certain historical and events and the zeitgeist and that kind of thing. So I think when it comes to prediction, which is notoriously difficult to do, it's always good to have that element of chance kind of entering into things. I think it makes it a little bit more real and a bit more kind of organic and authentic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my geomancy cards, and I'm going to fill out the houses and then sort of do a kind of horary style reading. And then I also plan to do a written forecast where I look at the astrology and just see how the two compare. I think it's always interesting to have several avenues of investigation looking into the same thing, and if they start to correlate, then that there's definitely something there, and if not, then you're kind of wildly off course. So it's useful sort of either way. And of course, the geomancy cards themselves do have astrological symbolism attached to them. So what I'm going to do is, when I come to pick the queer into the querceted, I'm going to use my Arcana of Astrology cards as significators, just so that we get a sense of the main players and the main energies that are interacting in the chart. So let's get shuffling, and yeah, let's see what happens. So as you've probably seen, I've had my geomancy cards updated. They're a little bit bigger now, so I'm hoping they'll be easier to see on the screen. And if you're interested in learning geomancy, I have produced an ebook, details of which you can find at the end of this video, in which I do kind of outline not just the meaning of each of the geomantic figures and their the elemental and the astrological symbolism attached to them, but also how to do horary style readings. So it's actually a great way to learn astrology, if you're not overly technical. I find it's a much more intuitive way in, much more visual. The cards. Whoopsie. Okay, so I'm going to follow the Golden Dawn system, where we do the cardines first, the cardinal houses. And I think that's good because it really highlights the link to the elements, which is all about the, first of all, the cross of matter, which you get in the the chart itself with the 4 cardinal signs, and then it shows that the links to the triplicities as well, which is the the cardinal, succedent and cadent houses. Right, and then I'm also going to do a left witness, a right witness, and a judge as kind of final outcome, and we'll turn those over at the end of the reading. Should make it a bit more interesting. Okay, so I just paused the video so that I could tidy up the cards a little bit, but let's get into the reading. Now I think what we do need to do, and normally this is a very important part of horary astrology, is to ascertain what sign rules the ascendant, because once we do that, then we'll know the house rulerships for the other houses, and that can be important because sometimes it can tell us which house, which planet is associated with which kind of a significator, if you know what I mean. So let's just have a look at the first house. Okay, interesting. So here we've got the sun in Leo, so that tells us that we've got Leo rising. So let's just find the card for Leo and just pop that there, and then what that does is it tells us what the signs of the other houses are. So this means that we've got Aquarius on the descendant. So in other words, we've got fixed signs on each of the cardinal houses. So that means that we've got Scorpio here in the 4th, and it means that we've got Taurus in the 10th. Now this is important because it I think points back to the hunter's moon that will occur a couple of days before this particular election. So this is the blue moon that happens on Halloween, on the 31st of October, and of course that is, if you go and read if you go and listen to my forecast about that, you'll quickly gather that this is associated with the unexpected, the October surprise, because the moon and Uranus are making a conjunction. So I do think that this MC-IC axis in the fixed signs of Taurus and Scorpio is important, and they are particularly important even in this reading because the MC-IC axis is really the sort of the axis of the leader and his people, the electorate. So these are probably the 2 most important houses in any kind of chart when we're looking at politics or elections, because whatever is in this house, or whatever planet rules this house, is usually an indicator of the electorate, and if that's not possible, or if we use it to indicate the political opponent to the current leader, then then the moon, it will fall to the moon to represent the people. So we'll see when we get to those geomantic figures what the story is. But I think it is significant that we've got the Taurus-Scorpio axis highlighted here, and of course it is Scorpio season as this election happens. We've also got Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. In fact, it turns direct on the day of the election, and I think that's going to be significant because whenever you've got Mercury retrograde, there's always the chance of delays or mistakes, so recounts are possible. There can also be miscounting, etc., etc. So that's worth bearing in mind, certainly. Particularly as Mercury will be sort of in this area astrologically. But as I say, I will look at the astrology of this in my forecast on the Astro Insights blog. So let's leave it at that for now. Alright, so let's quickly have a look at the geomantic figure for the 4th house. Interesting. So yes, I mean, you can't get more radical than this in a chart about the election. So in the 4th house we've got populace. This is the geomantic figure associated with crowds, and of course it's ruled by the moon in Cancer. So this for me very much is associated with the people. So I think this is telling us that the fourth house is is represented by the people, and in fact is ruled by the moon. So there's this kind of double energy indicating that the fourth house is related to the people. Now, very often when you're looking at legal contests and that kind of thing, you'll kind of look at the querent as being the first house, sort of ruled by the first house, the ascendant, which is, in this case is it's a Leo ascendant, so the sun. So it's interesting that that the sun in mundane astrology is associated with the leader, so with the president or whatever, and then his opponent in a contest will be in the seventh house, because this is the house of the other. So yes, we'll see what comes out in the geomantic figures. But let's have a look at the card for Donald Trump himself. So this is the current president. Okay, interesting. So here we've got Jupiter in Pisces. This is Laetitia. So this for me is this is Jupiter kind of retrograde. It's almost like Jupiter in its like an inverted position if you were talking about tarot. So it's interesting. This is Laetitia is all about joy and happiness, and I mean it is fair to say that Donald Trump is has been acting quite sort of euphoric since his recovery from COVID-19. Some people have said that this is possibly the side effects of the drugs that he's taking, the steroids, which apparently one of the side effects is euphoria. But he is kind of coming across as a man who's risen from the dead, or who's kind of had a second chance, a second crack at the whip kind of thing, who's kind of come back from adversity. So I think that fits quite well, actually. And he is very larger than life, and Jupiter is larger than life. So I think that that's quite fitting. Now it's worth saying that Taurus is the ruler of the 10th house cusp, which means that Venus rules this particular house. So that may be significant when we come to look at the other figures, and and look at how the whole thing kind of plays out. Okay, let's just look at the 7th just to see what's here. Oh, interesting. So this is fascinating. Okay, so in the 7th house of the opponent we have the geometric figure associated with the opponent, or the soldier, or the warrior. So this is Puer, which means boy, and it's ruled by Mars in Aries. So this is very much about that kind of combative, competitive energy, of political warfare, really. So I suppose in a way it is fitting that that Mars is in the 7th house. And in geomancy, the geomantic system developed before the discovery of the modern planets, so before the discovery of Uranus, Pluto and Neptune. So that means that we have to use the traditional ruler of Scorpio in the old system, which is Mars. So that's perfectly fitting, given that we've got Scorpio, here in the ruler of the 4th house cusp. So we will take this as being the indicator for Joe Biden. Now it's also interesting that he sits in a house that is ruled, that's got Aquarius on the cusp. So Aquarius is very much the sign of the people. It's the sign of the sort of the utopian ideals, and that kind of thing, which is I think quite fitting for the Democratic Party. They do seem to be the party of that embraces the idea of diversity, equality, equal opportunity, all of those kinds of things. And of course, as I said, we do need to bear in mind that Uranus, the influence of Uranus, because of the October surprise. So this is the kind of wild card, I feel, is sort of Joe Biden. So let's see what else is going on in the chart. So okay, interesting. Now here in the 2nd house, which is the house of the economy as well as the financial system, the nation's wealth, we've got Rubeus. And I think it's fair to say that Rubeus is red literally in Latin, and it's about the kind of hidden passion and the sort of simmering resentment of Scorpio. So this is Scorpio in its negative aspect, you could say, not necessarily as a schemer, but more as somebody who is kind of harboring ill feeling. You know, think about the Five of Cups in the tarot. So Rubeus for me, and literally, is, well, I mean, the actual symbol for Rubeus is a chalice or a wine glass turned upside down, so the liquid is spilt. So I think that, you know, this is kind of pointing to the devastation on the American economy in the wake of COVID-19. You know, it has really wreaked havoc. It's affected unemployment figures. It's affected the economy. We had that stock market crash back in kind of March, April, at the beginning of the lockdown, and you know, although some companies have recovered, there are a lot of small businesses that have gone out of, you know, have gone bankrupt because they can't operate properly. A lot of people are not able to go back to work full time because of social distancing, or, you know, ill health or restrictions. So this doesn't surprise me at all, and I think it will be a key driver for the way that people vote, I think, you know, because of this kind of simmering resentment. There may be an element of vengeance or vindictiveness, you know, wanting to kind of cast a protest vote, potentially, if they feel that Donald Trump has not handled the crisis particularly well. So that's worth bearing in mind. Now, the third house is associated with the media. It's also to do with propaganda, and more importantly, it is associated with the post office. And of course, postal voting this year is going to be particularly important, given that many people have voted this way, you know, because they don't want to go directly to voting booths. So let's see what's going on here. Interesting. So we have the same geometric figure as that of Donald Trump. Now, this could be important if we end up needing to go to something called mutual reception in order to determine an outcome to this reading. So it could be significant that you know, it may point to the potential of the postal vote actually going in Donald Trump's favor, but equally it could also point to a bias in the media. So the media may also play a role here in the outcome of the election. Now let's go to the fifth house. So this rules a couple of things: the birth rate, children, as well as things like the entertainment industry, travel and tourism, and also diplomats and diplomacy. So let's have a look at what's going on here. Okay, interesting. So this is conjunctio, which is literally marriage or union, and it's ruled by Mercury in Virgo. So this, I think, potentially points to celebrity endorsement as playing a role in particularly the youth vote. You know, and I think Hollywood traditionally does tend to favor Democratic candidates, so that may be significant. Anyway, we'll kind of bear that in mind. Now let's move to the sixth house. Now this will be important because, of course, this rules the nation's health, and of course we've had the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected you know, people's livelihoods, their lifestyle. So I think it's also going to play a very important role, along with the economy, in the way that people vote. Interesting. So here we've got Capricornus. This is the dragon's head. So this is fire in geomancy. This is the fire element, and for me it represents new beginnings. So it could well be that you know, people are looking to the future past COVID, and they want some kind of hope, that maybe they want like a clean slate when it comes to leader. Maybe they, you know, this has kind of affected people's overall perspective, or kind of their perception of the current leader and his handling of the crisis. It can also point to kind of changing trends within the economy. You know, when Donald Trump came to power, he did so by kind of harnessing the vote of the Rust Belt, number one, and those people who felt disaffected, or potentially whose livelihoods had been affected by globalization, you know, through things like steel imports, cheap steel imports from China. you know, he promised them that he would end that so that the steel industry in the US could be revived, and you know, he did actually he did fulfill that promise, but he did so by going back to old technologies and old industries that are essentially dying because they are not really environmentally friendly, and they are kind of green technologies, new green technologies coming in that Joe Biden certainly and the Democratic Party certainly emphasized as being the future, you know, in this election. So I think employment and jobs is also going to be important in this election. Now let's have a look at the 8th house. Interesting. So in both houses associated with money, the 2nd and the 8th house, we've got the same geomantic figure, Rubeus. So this is Mars ruled. Now, for me, the 8th house is about a couple of things. It's the house of vice, so it can be where we've got scandal or corruption. So if any of the candidates have done something untoward, this is, you know, where it will show up. But of course, we know that Donald Trump is kind of Teflon coated when it comes to scandal. It didn't really hurt him in the last election. He just sort of brushed it off, and so I don't really think that's going to affect him too much. The only thing outstanding, of course, is the topic of his taxes. But again, I mean, you know, when his tax returns were exposed, you know, a couple of months ago, again, it didn't seem to really have any sort of effect, you know, on him. Now, Rubeus, as I said, is quite passionate, and it's also potentially quite resentful and sort of vindictive. So again, on these two issues, there could be sort of you know, if candidates come up with policies, economic policies or foreign relations policies that end up hurting the American people, it could certainly come back to bite them later. So that's all I'll say about that right now. Now let's look at the 9th house. Okay, interesting. Now, the 9th house in mundane astrology is associated with religion, with kind of morals, with the law, as well as things like higher education, and also foreign matters. So foreign matters in this sort of diplomatic sense. So with Tristia here, this is Saturn in Aquarius, and of course, Saturn will move back into Aquarius in December, which is when we have that wonderful Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that I was saying in my my full moon forecast for the upcoming Hunter's moon will start a new 20-year cycle. So that could be significant here. But more to the point, Tristia as a geomantic figure it's water, it's air energy actually, but it's not considered to be a very auspicious figure. It talks of a sense of deflation, of sorrow, of regret, of remorse. It's the fallen tower, essentially. I kind of feel as though this is pointing to possibly a sense of despair when it comes to the kind of the soul of the country, you know, that people are in mourning, and you know, because of everything that's happened this year, and they feel really sort of let down and disappointed. Now, it could also point to religious leaders possibly regretting backing certain candidates. It could also point to the potential for some kind of delay or kind of legal objection related to the election. It might be that, you know, with Mercury retrograde and potentially causing a delay or a recount, that we could see a battle in the courts. That's a potential here. But I think we also need to think about what Saturn rules in this particular geomantic figure. So if we go back to the fact that Leo is rising, this means that Saturn rules the 6th house, which is the house of employment. It's also the house of, you know, workers, trade unions, and also I think the armed forces, if I'm not mistaken, because this is the house that Mars rejoices in. So yes, that may be significant, but it could equally be because you know, religious leaders who backed Trump last time maybe feel that this hasn't, the way that he's kind of handled the plight of workers, particularly blue-collar workers, who many of whom are quite religious may not necessarily have been what they expected. So that's just something, you know, to sort of bear in mind. Now let's have a look at the 11th house. Interesting. So the 11th house for me is associated with Congress. So this is the house of groups and groupings, and so this is the kind of legislative branch of government, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And it's interesting that it's ruled by Venus, or Venus is in this particular house, because of course Venus rules the midheaven in this particular reading. But a missio in and of itself is about financial loss and kind of a sense of loss or transience. So there could also be some quite big changes happening when it comes to who's elected, you know, democratically as you know, candidates for Congress. There may be a bit of a shake-up going on there. So that's something to bear in mind. Let's have a look at 12th house finally. Interesting. So again, we've got Venus. This is Venus in Libra, Puella. And Puella is normally associated with harmony, with civility, with fairness, and to an extent justice. So I think Puella here is pointing to the nation's desire for peace, equality, fairness, you know, all the things that are embodied in the American Constitution. This is supposedly the land of the free, where, you know, everybody has equal opportunity, and I think that things have been very skewed in the last few years with regards to that. So I think in the back of Americans' minds is this desire to kind of go back to first principles, really, when it comes to the Constitution, and that's what they want in a leader. I think what we should do now is just clarify some of the main significators with some trinkets. So the main significators that we're looking at in this particular reading are the Jupiter for Donald Trump. So let's just find that. Right, so there's Trump, and then Joe Biden, who is Mars in this particular reading. So there's Joe Biden, and then the electorate, because they're the ones that are going to pick. So there's the moon, ruler of populace for the electorate, and then perhaps we should have the sun as well for the office itself, which is kind of in the first house, ruled by the sun. So, okay, and then we'll pause there and just do some trinkets. I'll only pull these cards once we've actually looked at any possible aspects or contacts between these significators as a kind of final outcome. So let's look first of all at Trump. Well, before we do that, let's have a look at the electorate. No, well, let's do the two candidates first. So Jupiter first. Interesting. Okay, so two trinkets have come out, the dog and the star. So I think apt, the dog star, so this may point to Sirius, actually, literally the dog star. So I need to consider the position of Sirius in this chart. So Sirius is normally in Cancer, and that is in the 12th house. So that's interesting. I'll pick that up when I have a look at the astrology in case it's important. But I think what it's kind of saying is that Donald's support base is going to remain loyal to him, largely, and that he's got great hopes for the future, you know, that he'll win a second term. So he looks quite confident here, which is quite typical of Jupiter in energy anyway. Jupiter tends to be confident, sometimes to the point of overconfidence. Okay, let's have a look at Mars. Oh, and I didn't say as well that you know, we've got Pluto ruling the 4th house cusp, which gave us Mars in the first place for Biden. And it's interesting that Biden himself is I think he's like a quadruple Scorpio, including Mars. So it's interesting that you know, he is actually, his energy is quite Martian in the sense that we don't have Pluto in this reading. So that is actually very apt for him. Okay, interesting. So the trinket that's come out is the Mountain. I'm going to pull another one just because we've got two for Trump. Okay, so this is the kind of the crossroads. So this is very interesting, actually. Both of these trinkets kind of point to either some kind of delay or hindrance or obstacle, but also some kind of choice. So it looks to me as though for some reason Biden is at a crossroads. Now, I mean, he is, the one thing I will say is that he is quite an old candidate to be running for president. He's going to be 78, I think, this year. And Trump is a little bit younger. I think he's about 4 years younger. So both candidates are quite old to be sort of running for office. No, but there does seem to be some kind of choice here. And I don't know, you know, what this involves. Yeah, I think let's see what kind of comes out when we look at aspects. But yeah, I mean, I've always felt, particularly with that wild card of the Moon Uranus conjunction on the 31st, which is only a couple of days before this particular election, that there's something about this election that is unpredictable. You know, gut feeling for me is that it's not, you know, I always thought it wasn't going to happen, or that there was going to be some kind of external disruption that was going to either delay it or put it off. So it could have something to do with whatever this choice or this delay is. And of course, we can't rule out the fact that, you know, both candidates, potentially Biden and Trump, could, you know, get sick. You know, Trump isn't out of the woods yet as far as COVID-19 is concerned. You know, we do have to bear in mind long COVID. So, and you know, there's still a chance that Joe Biden could get ill. So it looks like there's some kind of third factor going on here that we need to just bear in mind. Now let's look at the electorate. The moon. Interesting. So I'm going to get another one. Yeah. Okay, so these two figures to me tell me that the electorate, generally speaking, is hurting from the loss that they've faced. You know, this particularly during 2020. So they're kind of feeling hard done by, and they're looking for somebody who's going to give them stability, which is the anchor. So they're looking for the more stable candidate, the person who's going to steady the ship. And this reminds me a lot of 2017 in the UK, actually, when David Cameron stepped down after the Brexit vote, and they had a leadership race for the Tory party to see who would take over. And a lot of people said that Theresa May got chosen because she was considered to be the sort of the steady hand on the tiller. So I kind of feel like this is what the American people are after right now, after what's been a very tumultuous year. Okay, now let's have one for the Sun, just as to kind of get a sense of, because the Sun represents the leader. So this might give us a taste of who will become the leader. Okay, so we've got the Tower, and the Cross. So interesting. So these two together kind of point to almost like a martyr energy. That's what I want to say. The Tower is somebody that is a loner or is kind of isolated, but also somebody who may either need to get good advice from advisors, or who is an advisor themselves, because it does speak of kind of officials and bureaucrats, that kind of thing. And then the cross here is very, very often about the cross of suffering. it could be that that as I mean, God forbid this should happen, but what happened if both candidates became incapacitated either before taking office or during office, and that could also be what is on people's minds, and this is kind of the first house, so it does also point to where Americans kind of are mentally at the moment, the kind of the state of the nation. So very, very interesting. All right, now let's consider aspects. So the important thing in any kind of election chart is whether the moon makes aspects to, first of all, either of the significators for the candidates, or indeed the ruler of the midheaven, which is Venus. So let's just get out the indicator for Venus, because in this particular map, Venus is it's kind of in the 12th house and the 11th house. So I'm just going to put it there. All right. So now we need to consider the aspects of the various significators to each other. So of course, what we want to know is whether the full moon, whether the moon here, which is the indicator of the electorate, whether it makes a contact to either Jupiter, which represents Donald Trump, or to Mars, which represents Joe Biden. And of course, if there is a positive aspect, that's more likely to indicate their choice, and a negative aspect that they don't really, they're unlikely to go for that candidate. So what's interesting is that the moon is opposite Jupiter, so this is a negative aspect. So it looks like the electorate is to a large extent quite repelled by Trump, literally. He is sort of diametrically opposed to what they're kind of after. But then the moon is also square to Mars, which is an equally challenging aspect. So it's almost like, as I said, the two candidates are sort of, it's going to be a case of the lesser of two evils. So that doesn't really sort of work either. Now the other way that we can potentially make a decision about perfection is something called what do you call it? I keep wanting to say mutual reception, but it's mutation. So this is when the significator of a particular position passes to another house by correspondence. So for example, in this chart we've got Mars ruling Biden here in the 7th house, but we also have geomantic figures for Mars in both the 8th house and the 2nd house. So we could potentially move, sort of transpose the energy of Mars onto the 2nd or the 8th house. Now what's interesting is that Jupiter too is repeated here. We've got the same geomantic figure for Letitia, which is Trump, in the 3rd house. Now this is fascinating because, as I said, this is the house that represents the postal vote. So we could potentially transpose Trump to the 3rd house, in which case he will be right next to the full moon, so to the electorate. But then equally we could transpose Biden here to the 2nd house, which would mean that that Biden would make a sextile angle to the electorate, which is quite favorable. Actually, it's a very favorable aspect. But then it becomes a question of, well, which one wins out? Is the conjunction considered stronger? So in other words, would this relationship of kind of proximity win out over the positive sextile angle? That's certainly a possibility. I mean, my general feeling is that the electorate are wanting a change, and that they're thinking more along the lines of Joe Biden, and that's certainly what the polls are suggesting at the moment. But I think it's going to be a close run thing, and what it seems to me is that what we're going to have is that the postal vote is potentially going to be the deciding factor. Now, of course, Donald Trump has sort of threatened to sue the Postal Service. He's already sort of poo-pooed it and said it probably won't be able to handle the extra workload. So I think he's kind of downplayed that, but I think it's more kind of a prevention strategy in case the postal vote doesn't sort of go with him. And we know that he's notoriously quixotic, so he could change his mind if things go in his favor. But I think it's certainly pointing to a situation that's too close to call, potentially. I think it's going to be a very close run thing, and there does seem to be this wild card, kind of in the mix in the form of Uranus, which we've got here, kind of prominent with Aquarius on the descendant, and with that blue moon in Taurus. So isn't it interesting that the blue moon in Taurus, it happens in the same sign as the sign that rules the midheaven, which is the leader. So I do think there's something that unexpected, some plot twist that's going to happen that is potentially going to kind of swing things one way or another. So let's look to the two witnesses and the judge to see whether that can give us a final outcome. Interesting. So here we've got the left and the right witnesses. I tend to read this as being kind of like two testimonies. This is kind of past, this is present, and then this is the future or the final outcome. So interesting that we've got Corsair here, and then we've got Cauda Draconis. Now the two together to me point to a sense of like limitation or feeling trapped, particularly Corsair. There's the sense of things not having kind of gone in a particularly favourable direction in the past. Again, I think alluding to COVID-19 and the economic impacts that it's had. And then there's also, I think, the factor of age here, that both candidates are not young, so that may also be playing on people's minds, because they are looking for a stable leader, and maybe they're worried about people not being physically up to the task. And then we've got Cauda Draconis, which is the tail of the dragon. So this is the opposite geomantic figure to the Caput Draconis, which we've got in the 6th house. So this for me points to, this is about endings. And so yes, I mean, I kind of feel as though what it's saying is that we've kind of come to the end of an era, possibly, when it comes to the American sort of democratic system. Or it could be that there's this desire within the electorate for kind of out with the old and in with the new. So this could potentially mean Donald Trump not being re-elected. But equally, there's a third factor that we need to consider, and this may be part of the wild card, is that we've had a lot of kind of civil unrest in America in the last few months, particularly since that lunar eclipse that we had back in June, the Sagittarius one, when the nodes changed signs, and that coincided with the rise of quite a lot of protests and that kind of thing. So there is a possibility that there may be civil unrest, and that this will kind of disrupt the elections. So we do need to sort of bear that in mind. It could be the wild card that sort of delays any kind of result, or disrupts the election and kind of postpones it, completely. So interesting that the outcome is Tristia, which echoes this 9th house here. So again, pointing to like loss and grief, sorrow, and the fallen tower, which, I mean, I can't help but think of that, those images that we've had in the last few months of lightning striking a couple of towers in America. So first of all, the Washington Monument, secondly, the Empire State Building, and then I think there was a third one, I can't remember. But many people seeing that as a sort of an omen that's very similar to the falling tower in the tarot, which is all about the fall of the establishment, the doing away of the old structures, of old political structures, and so kind of almost like new broom sweeps clean. So it could well be that you know, this is a kind of an omen, because of course the ninth house can also be about signs and omens from you know, from the realm of spirit. So that's something to consider as well. I think what we need to do now is just clarify with some trinkets. So because I mean, this is not a kind of joyous outcome. It certainly doesn't match the energy of Trump, for example. Now that may be because he's a little bit deluded and is overly optimistic. As I said, could be the, you know, the influence of drugs. I mean, this is kind of either way sort of sorrow. It's not the electorate kind of being happy. So let's see if the trinkets can kind of clarify for us. So I'm going to pull one for each and then see what, you know, comes of that. Okay, so we've got Fisher's forecast there. So I think this has to do with the kind of the outflow of money, you know, from the economy. People concerned about, you know, the economy, because Fishes for me is largely about wealth. And it's also a disruption of the flow of life, you know, people feeling imprisoned in their own homes, social distancing. There are all these kind of limitations being placed on people that are kind of hamstringing them and preventing the American economy from kind of, you know, carrying on. Business as usual is being disrupted, basically. Okay, so for counter draconis we've got the birds. Now this to me is about, first and foremost, about communication. So again, it could point to something sort of to do either with something being leaked, for example, or it could have something to do with the system itself, the voting system, that it kind of fails on some level, or it may have something to do with the, you know, the postal system, you know, with counting, or, you know, that kind of thing. Let's just have one more as a kind of clarifier. Okay, so here we've got the fox. So this to me points to kind of subterfuge or interference, potentially. So I guess we can't rule out the fact that there may be interference from a foreign state, like there was in the 2016 election with Russia. I mean, even though Trump kept saying that he was exonerated from any involvement, there was certainly, I think it was proved sort of beyond doubt in the Mueller report that there had been Russian interference. It may not have been collusion with the Trump camp, but certainly they wanted to interfere in and sort of affect the outcome. So it could be that we've got interference here by a foreign state. So that again may explain the delay, you know, the wild card here. It can also potentially point to scandal or a leak. So, you know, sabotage of one or both candidates. Interesting. Okay, so we've got the lily here. I'm going to pull one more. Okay, so these two trinkets are quite interesting, actually. The lily is about being pure or above reproach, but it's also about maturity. And sometimes it's associated, you know, the lilies can be associated with funerals. So I am kind of wondering whether we are talking about the fact that both candidates are quite mature, quite, you know, they're kind of getting on in years, and Also, we've got the snake here. Now, this can be read in a couple of ways. It can be read as a process that's long drawn out. So again, it could be a delay where the result gets caught up in the legal system, you know, that the courts are sort of end up having to decide the outcome of the election, which could explain a possible delay. But this can also be about betrayal. This can be about subterfuge, about kind of machinations behind the scenes that somehow affect the outcome of the election. And of course, that's always a possibility when you've got elections. You know, we've had this sort of throughout the history of politics, of kind of certain interest groups swinging the vote one way or another, or vote intimidation, you know, interference with votes, etc., etc. So we can't rule this out, given that we've got the fox and we've got the snake, you know, in this particular reading. But here, you know, given the tristtia is about loss, grief and sorrow, and that we've got the lily here, it could also be that we're talking about one of those candidates falling ill, or potentially not seeing their term in office through due to, you know, ill health or something of that nature, which again would explain why we've got the tower and the cross here, the cross also being sort of the cross of suffering. So quite a complicated reading, and I think no definitive outcome really. It'll be interesting to see what comes out in the astrology, but I think what we can say is that it will be a close run thing, given that we've got Mars and Jupiter right next to each other, and both of them aspecting the moon here, which is the electorate. So yes, I think probably best to leave it open, given that, you know, we don't know what that wild card is yet, that's likely to sort of turn up on the Hunter's moon with that plot twist, that Moon-Uranus conjunction. So let's see what that brings. And yes, all eyes peeled on the news next week. But yes, I hope you've enjoyed this and that it's provided food for thought. And let me know if you'd like to see more, you know, videos like this about, you know, global events, political affairs, that kind of thing on the channel. But anyway, wishing you a great week, and I'll catch you again for my next forecast.